I'm Jim Cutler, and this is U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. In 1946, Carl Strandland asked for $15 million worth of emergency loans to build small houses for GIs returning from World War II. Strandland was not an architect, but his idea that metal neighborhoods could be prefabricated and swiftly built was persuasive, and the Lustron prefab house was born. To manufacture the 10 tons of steel that went into each two-bedroom Lustron, Strandland bought a 25-acre factory in Columbus, Ohio, which was used during the war to build fighter planes. A few years and only about 3,000 Lustrons later, the company declared bankruptcy, but thousands of these unique houses survive. Joining us today is U.S. Modernist resident Lustron expert Virginia Faust and new Lustron owner Mark Seibel. Later, we welcome back jazz vocalist Monika Ryan. And now, here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. If you've stopped at a rural gas station, not one in the interstates, you may have experienced part of a Lustron house. Some country gas stations still have exteriors made of these 2x2 porcelainized steel plates. They're almost always white, and they were built in the 50s and 60s. Most of them in urban areas have been torn down, sadly. These porcelainized plates were also used for Lustrons as both exteriors and interior walls. And what was fun is that they are magnetic. When you want to hang a picture on the wall, no nails. You just mount it with a magnet. Cleaning is easy too, as a porcelainized enamel surface could be wiped down with water. What could go wrong with an easy-to-assemble, inexpensive, well-produced prefab house in a housing shortage? Well, nothing, except for the National Home Builders Association, which was threatened by this new upstart and successfully lobbied Lustron's funding sources to run them out of business. We're working on a national Lustron directory, hopefully in place on the USModernist.org website by the time this show airs. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Virginia Faust was bit hard by the Lustron bug years ago, and she's been working to preserve the famed 1940s metal-clad prefab homes ever since. Most recently, she has worked with Preservation North Carolina and the Pines Preservation Guild to preserve 3 of Hoke County's original Lustrons. When she's not documenting North Carolina's modernist residential masterpieces, she is otherwise indulging her passion in mid-century design. Mark Seibel is a general contractor based in Raleigh, North Carolina, who has seen his share of renovations and restorations. Along with Tina Royals, Mark has renovated Tanglewood Farm, one of the most well-preserved farmsteads in Johnston County, North Carolina, and he is now wrestling with his own Lustron reassembly project. Welcome, Virginia and Mark.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Virginia, let's start with some basic background. You are certainly a U.S. Modernist Lustron expert and maybe one of the foremost experts now in the country. What was the Lustron and why was it so important?
I think it's a perfect example of post-World War II engineering and enthusiasm designed to fit the market for GIs returning from the war. So there was this great rush of people who needed housing. They wanted to start families. Lustron was not the only company to get into the market of building houses for returning GIs. We have a picture on the web page of there were like 10 different companies who thought that basically a mass-produced or formulaically produced house would be faster and possibly better than stick-built. So the Lustron Corporation managed to get money from the government to do this based upon Carl Strandland's success. He had several patents to his name and had done a magnificent job saving the Army a whole bunch of money on armor plating tanks. He worked for Chicago Vitreous. He was the head of Chicago Vitreous. And they made the enamel that coats these steel panels. His company had been doing this for White Castle and some other companies that were making like Sunoco gas stations and things.
Yeah, because that was the basic material. If you drove up to a gas station at the time, it would have this porcelainized enamel.
Exactly.
That was metal, and you could put magnets on it and hold things onto it.
Correct. So Carl thought they wouldn't give him an allocation for steel for gas stations, but they said what we're directing our efforts towards now is home production. And so the light bulb went off in his head, and he got a hold of like Carl Koch, who's an architect who did the Acorn houses and some others, and said, well, if I can do houses made out of this enameled steel, are we on? And the government gave him a lot of money. They gave him the use of a disused airplane plant outside of Columbus, Ohio, and he had custom-made machinery to dip the panels, and they did a huge, magnificently productive marketing blitz. In Life magazine, there were ads that you could send in for information on Lustrons, and the women working in the office just got overwhelmed. Mailbags full of these coupons came in. And they built demonstration models in prominent places, and they had people lined up literally down the street and around the block to go through these little tiny houses. So they got a lot of orders for them. They sold them through a distribution system.
And this was late 40s, right?
This was late 40s, correct. And the way they decided to market these, they had a set of distributors who had to make the arrangements. The people had to buy the land, and they had to get the slab poured according to their stipulations. And then the people had to pay for the lustrons up front, which was kind of one of those things. They didn't think through the financing of it very well. And in the end, they made some modifications so people could finance to buy it. So there were a number of things they did extremely well in terms of the design, the engineering, and the delivery system, and a number of things that they neglected totally, i.e., if you got a truck going down the road with the tonnage that these things were, it somewhat limited where these could be built. So most of them got built out in the country on pieces of land that were relatively inexpensive. The financing was an issue. And then the government in early summer of 1950 forced them into bankruptcy. And there was a lot of...
Why'd they do that?
Well, another company wanted the factory. A lot of people felt that the government should not be subsidizing the housing industry. There was an extreme objection by the stick-built housing market. People thought of all sorts of reasons why these things should not be insurable. Building inspectors didn't know quite how to handle them. It was kind of a congregation of things, chief of which, of course, was people didn't think they should loan them more money to become viable. And the guy who wanted the airplane manufacturing plant got it. So a lot of it was politics. There were Senate hearings. You can read the reports. And the internal reports from people who worked there for a long time indicate that they all knew that there was something else besides the, quote, built-in inefficiencies that caused the demise of the plant. So what they did, all the parts that were there, they auctioned them off, and people sometimes bought 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 parts that were on the assembly line or had been made. They were in this factory. And you'll find oddball things, like there's one motel, it's in Ohio, where they bought the Lustron parts and they put them on stick-built. So you have a porcelain enamel siding on this motel. And on the back of the motel, you have a little carport. So you could drive in and go into your motel room without even being, your car was hidden, which I guess was a great advantage at the time. And a few people
The no-tell motel.
No-tell motel.
Depending on the clientele, right?
Exactly. And then some other people bought panels and they did stick-built Lustron garages. So we find quite often there will be, say, a Lustron that was built on land according to the tax records in 1949, but there's a garage that was built clearly in 1952 according to the permits. And the reason they did that is because of all these parts that they bought as part of the bankruptcy auction. We have tried to find, in what I would assume would be government records, because it was government property by the time they took it back, a list of who bought all this stuff, but there does not appear to be evidently, all these things that were delivered did not have packing lists, so you had no idea if you were getting all of the parts. I find it astonishing that they can deliver a house with no packing list, but nobody that we've talked to has found one. And nobody has found the list of things that were auctioned off with the bankruptcy. And one person told me that, when that was done, they just threw everything away. I find that difficult. They're buried somewhere in some archive in the United States government, something.
Where the Ark of the Covenant is as well.
I think probably. And remember, this is steel, so it's heavy, so it's a very well done ark. But basically, that's it. So,
okay.
So when they stopped making these, they've kind of become a chic cult thing. It's either the people who live there love them and appreciate them and would die to have another one, or people just don't understand what the appeal is.
Well, Mark, let me ask you. You've been inside a Lustron, right?
I have been, yeah.
So what is it like to go in one? What is it like to be inside one of these fabled houses?
Well, I guess for me, the most interesting thing is that everything is metal. Everything is, it's all paneled. So there's no place to put a screw. There's no place to put a nail. It's all screwed together.
So it's like a giant erector set?
Like a giant erector set, yeah. And I know that the one in downtown Raleigh is still sitting, and it is all open to the weather, but it's a really good example of how the thing is put together.
Correct.
So a Lustron house, typically you go in and there's a living room and a little dining room and then a galley kitchen quite often, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then there's some sort of Jetsons futuristic heating unit in the middle. Tell us about that.
That is exactly right. Apparently, it was an oil burner little gas pack that was in the ceiling area, and it was supposed to be dispersing the heat from the ceiling. Apparently didn't work too well.
No.
Because heat stays up by the ceiling.
Correct.
Well, they did have a plenum system in there, so they had long strand asbestos sheets that were up there in the plenum, and you could divert the thing. The idea was it would go from this heater, which was, as he said, up in the utility room, and it would go through the plenum, and you could send it to different bedrooms or the bathrooms if you adjusted the plenum right. But as noted, the floor was always colder than the ceiling and the walls.
Did you say asbestos sheets?
Yes, she did.
Uh-oh.
It's long sheath asbestos. So they were sheets, not blown in, so as long as you don't make the asbestos friable, even when you're taking them apart, you can take the roof tiles off and lift the asbestos out. Yes, it's asbestos, but it's not a danger.
It's good asbestos.
Right,
it's friendly asbestos.
Right. Friendly, not friable. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So these houses were produced late 40s to early 50s and then stopped.
Correct.
And then over the next 40 years, what happened? How many of them were produced approximately?
According to the factory records, 2,500. We don't know where a lot of those are. We have people who return the surveys that we send out, and they say, oh, there's 3 down the street that we didn't know about, Tom Fetters didn't know about, Angie didn't know about, none of the lists know about. So we have found a number of, I would say there's probably 1,600 left and about 200 or 300 more that we know what happened to them that aren't left. So there's still some that we have absolutely no record of, and we're hoping they turn up before we do this thing in 2025 if we get it put together.
And there's also a category of crazy guys, and they seem to be all guys, who bought up bundles of these in the 90s or the 2000s, right?
I don't know about bundles, but...
well, more than one, let's say.
Yes.
Why are they pointing to Mark?
He's a new crazy guy. He's just doing one of them.
Because we know George didn't buy them. And I am not a guy.
So, for example, you worked on a project about 60 miles south of here to recover a lot of Lustrons that had been in storage for almost 30 years.
Correct. Here in North Carolina, down in Carthage, a gentleman named D.P. Black, he had bought, there were 8 of the Lustrons for sale. Mr. Black bought 3 of them, had them disassembled, and supposedly stored them in his lot across from his house there in Aberdeen. And then one of those was transferred and reestablished about half a mile away from this storage place. So that's 4. One was purchased by Robert Drakeford's family, and Robert was the mayor of Carborough. And that house was put on Palmer Road outside of Marston. It was directly opposite an RV park that had 2 yurts, 7 geodesic domes, just all sorts of stuff. Mr. Drakeford passed away last year, and the park is no longer there. I went by there a couple weeks ago. The Lustron is now owned, or still owned by his brother, but it's on the other side of the road. And we don't know. There's one missing. Somebody said one went to the coast, so we don't know where one of those is.
But your recovery effort in that area around Carthage, Southern Pines was really remarkable. You're out in a field trying to pull together immense numbers of parts in containers that
with
had
no
been
list.
sitting there for decades. So how do you approach even planning for that?
If I knew then what I know now, Would have left him there. So the deal was Preservation North Carolina had been after Mr. Black for a number of years to rescue these 3 Lustrons. And I had written to him several times. The minister who was involved with this, helping the heirs sell this stuff, told me, I said, you should have written to her, not to him. Well, now he tells me. Anyway, so PNC was trying to get these things from him forever. And when Kathleen Turner of PNC learned of the unfortunate death of the Blacks, she said, I know this is an inopportune time, but she got in touch with the attorney for the estate and said, can you put us in touch with the heirs? We would really like to have access to these. So they did, and they got in touch, and they said, that's fine. We will hold off having this demolition crew. D.H. Griffin was coming in to clean up all the stuff on this lot because not only Lustron parts this man had, but he had like 7 or 8 trailers. He had wrecked hearses. He had asphalt tar laying machine. He had every piece of machinery you could ever imagine. Culverts big enough to drive a tank through. Just everything on this lot. He collected stuff. He was in the building business, and he collected stuff. And he had multiple lots around Aberdeen and Carthage. But anyway, so they had D.H. Griffin coming in to clean this out, and the heirs said, okay, we'll give you a little while. So Kathleen and Ben, who was working on the one in Raleigh, got him to hold off for a little bit. And Ben's advice was that this stuff is all rusted. He'd seen it. And he says it's all jumbled around. The trusses are out in the field. And he was right. But I thought, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity if those things are there or on some other lot. So I coupled together a bunch of volunteers, got some donated money. Pines Preservation Guild got this very nice gentleman who owns an equal number of warehouses and land and everything around that area. And he gave us basically free rent for 6 months for a warehouse to sort the things out and to pull the insulation out, the fiberglass insulation, not asbestos, fiberglass. So we had guys with trailers going up this slippery slope, loading this heavy stuff in. And I sent George pictures of the back of these things. You open up these 45-foot things, and all these parts just come out. And one of the trailers had the roof collapsed because of the tree falling on it. So we had mice droppings, we had bird nests, we had all sorts of other stuff you never want to see on pieces. And all of the trusses were out in a field. And I had to ask the guys from D.H. Griffin, well, can we leave those until we get a crane to come in and move them? Because obviously, you're not going to pick those up. And there was some debate about that. And I thought, well, I know the steel was bonderized at the factory, which is a protective coating they put on for rust, which is why the one in Raleigh is probably okay. But these have been out here for 30 years. So I found a local engineer who was sympathetic to the issue, and for less than full price, but not inexpensive, he came out and looked at the stuff and said, no, I don't think there's a building inspector in the country that will let you use this stuff. I said, okay, it stays right where it is. So having made that decision, it got a little bit easier to figure out which parts to take and which ones to scrap. So we paid the heirs for scrap value of the tonnage that we took, both to go to the Raleigh Lustron. Kathleen and Ben took that, and he came back and got some more. And then I took the rest of it to this nice, relatively free warehouse in Carthage for 6 months, and we'd have parties where I'd buy them lunch and breakfast and drinks and snacks, and we would sort and weigh and inventory panels.
This is a massive amount of work, Virginia.
It was an awful lot of work. I am a meticulous record keeper, so I can tell you exactly how many hours was worked by each person. I got them all to sign the liability releases. That was part of our deal on our lease with the owner.
Virginia, how many pieces is a Lustron home composed of?
About 3,000.
Okay.
Yeah, each house is about 3,000. And that counts some of the nuts and bolts and things.
Uh-huh.
As it turns out, we did not get 3 houses worth of parts. And I know that he probably got 3 houses taken apart. We had 3 of the bathtubs, 3 of the vanities, 1 of the squiggles, which are like the ends of the gutter, part of the gutter, 1 door out of the 6 we should have had, 3 electrical panels, no Thor, the combination dishwasher clothes thing. Only
I love the terms.
Well, it was different. It was different tubs. You didn't put your dishes in and then turn around and wash your laundry. You switched tubs. So the cleanliness issue, it sounds weird, but it wasn't as unsanitary as it sounds at first.
A good idea that didn't work.
Right. Mark, you didn't get your particular Lustron from this grouping. Where did you get yours from?
We did not. We got ours from a guy named Gary Ace, and he got it from the guy who had taken it apart on Mount Bolus Road. And
Chapel Hill.
Yes, in Chapel Hill. And apparently it was given to him from a church. So the church got a hold of it somehow, and then they sold it to this architect that took it apart, and Gary Ace ended up with it a few years later. And for the past 20 years or so, it's been sitting in a trailer.
So in a field somewhere rusting with mice, or in better condition?
I got the mice.
Originally, it was in a field, and then they packed it into a trailer.
Okay.
And I have yet to take it out of the trailer, so we don't really know what we have.
Were any Lustrons used as churches?
No, I would imagine somebody gave it to him in their
maybe.
will.
Yeah.
That was my thought. Because there's two of them side by side on Mount Bolus Road in Chapel Hill. Number 7, which is the one that we have, and number 5 is still there.
Now, one of the things that Virginia has also specialized in besides these Lustron expeditions is that she's been collecting some of the collateral material. And I'm hoping, Virginia, that you found some assembly manuals to help Mark here out.
We do have a copy of the erection manual, which is very thorough, very detailed, and you just follow the directions. But you got to read the manual first.
I did do that.
For 3,000 pieces, I would hope so.
The erection manual is 250 pages. So it's very thorough.
Yep.
So
and
we'll see.
The advertising for this time, which I've seen, made it seem like this was something like just a couple of friends could get together and like put their house up over a weekend if they had their pad. But it's more complicated than that.
Well, it was much more complicated than that. After you had the pad down, they said a group of guys could put it together in a week. But the biggest hurdle that I saw that they didn't plan on was building codes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In a lot of places in the country, we had building codes like if you tried to put the thing together in Chicago, it had to have drywall on the inside, period. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. It had to have drywall, plaster walls, something. It couldn't be a metal wall on the inside of the house.
Was that because of fire or?
Just because of our building codes, yeah.
Okay.
Unfamiliarity and inflexibility in the codes because they didn't know what it was. If it had been a commercial thing, like a gas station, the code is different for a commercial building and the building is different. So if they had said that this is a gas station,
they could have lived in it.
Yeah, and it's the same crew, the same place, the same time. It's just the building codes were an extreme obstacle. That and the housing industry itself was not particularly fond of these things. There were some other examples of ones built during this time that were either steel or aluminum houses, and they too ran into resistance from insurance and building companies.
Now, as the decades roll by, one man emerges as the godfather of Lustron. Who was that, Virginia?
Yes, Tom Fetters. He documents other odd things, so he's not just a Lustron person. So he wrote this book in 2002 in conjunction with some other things that he was researching. And actually, a gentleman called Brian Weinhoff was also going to write a book, but he found out that Tom was writing a book. So the Weinhoffs have been very instrumental in the technical details of how to do this, what to do if you need to do A, B, and C, whereas Tom has been the documentarian side all along.
He's been compiling lists of where the houses were, if they were still standing, if they'd been destroyed, all of that.
And he's still around. He still has his original book. And the way he did that is he's got Polaroid pictures, and each one has a page. So they're in fat 5-ring binders. None of his things have been put on computer until his daughter, Jean, I don't know whether she initiated the contact with WGN or whether they got in touch with her, but WGN started filming. They have hours of
This is the Chicago TV station?
There was a documentary.
Yeah, Chicago TV station, and we have that video, the link on our page. They came to the house and did, I think Jean said she herself copied, also videoed it, and it was like 8 hours worth of stuff that the guy was talking to Tom about. And Tom, of course, is getting up there in years, so he's a little more deliberate in his speech than he was the first time he was on your podcast. They did cut that down quite a bit by the time it was broadcast, and there was a delay in when it was released. So Jean is working on the spring here, and she knows that this WGN thing is not yet edited, not yet produced, not yet released. And she's also been talking with the publisher of the book about doing a second edition. So this is the same time that we were hauling fiberglass, wearing Tyvek suits, and 55 40-gallon bags of fiberglass insulation. that was fun.
That's a lot.
Anyway, so she's doing this. She and her dad are working on the second revision of the book. So Tom is involved in updating this. But what she's doing now is she set up a web page. So they have a web page called Lustron Research where people can register their Lustron, and she's going to incorporate a bunch of stuff here, including the idea is that all of the documentation that we do about the current owners, the condition, the serial numbers, that Cindy...
Because each one had a serial number coming out of the factory.
Each one had a serial number coming out of the factory, unless it was one that was constructed from the panels that were sold in the bankruptcy.
Or from the parts.
Right. You didn't get a serial number. If your house was there waiting to be sold, you got no serial number after the bankruptcy.
Now, Mark, you're an experienced general contractor. What has possessed you to go down this road, and particularly since you've got building codes to contend with?
Well, as you know, we're Modernist fans.
Right.
So we had spoken with Gary about what he had years ago at one of the movies at the movie series. So I've been interested for a long time. Until Tina and I bought the farm, did we have a place to put one? So now we have a place to put it. So we will see about building codes and how it is going to play out. I know that the guy in Raleigh had a horrifying time trying to get the city to approve his building permits. So apparently they had given it back to the city, and the city resold this thing to some fella from Chapel Hill.
Yeah, Gary. Mm-hmm.
And what do you anticipate being the hardest challenge with reconstructing the building?
I guess making sure all the parts are there. That's my biggest concern.
Okay.
Is that we have everything. It's got to be very, very exact because there's no wiggle room where you can, shave a board here or there because it's perfectly built.
When these things were put together, Virginia, and with the manual and so forth, was it like you see in today, like with a Lego set, it shows like, A goes into B and 1 goes into 2, or was it more general than that?
The erection manual is amazingly precise on the order in which you need to do these things. So if you follow the instructions, the arrows, some of the parts actually had numbers on the back of them. The ones I've seen taken apart never do. But there's a method to the madness, and it all kind of layers. So in order to get, for example, at the gutters, which are integrated with the roof, you have to start up on the top with the roof cap and take this layer off and this layer off and this layer off, like with the one in Lewisburg where they had a fire. So it goes together in a very logical, sensible manner, but you do have to be precise about it. The 2x2 panels interlock, and there's a gasket there to prevent both the thermal expansion and contraction, so it buffers that. And it also guarantees, stability is when the screws go into the steel frames. None of the interior walls are load-bearing, so you got to make sure you get everything right in order to have load distribution appropriate. It's tedious for people to do with these older ones because sometimes there's rust conversion that needs to be done. Sometimes the panels get dinged up when they've been moved 18 times before they end up in your yard. Thank you.
Yeah, are they prone to dents?
If you have a lawnmower that throws rocks up against, yes, which is what happened to the one on Perkins Avenue here in Durham. It was a rental property for a while. So we ended up having to paint the outside of that one. Yes, they do dent. There are now patches that you can use for that are available to non-commercial. I mean, gas stations have been fixing these things for years. My analogy is that a Lustron house is like a car without wheels. So if you have people who own these who are car mechanics, car restorers, whatever, familiar with the idea of, we're not talking Bondo, we're talking about rust conversion and sealants and everything, and then you put gel gloss on them and they shine and they're beautiful. So those are the people that put them together. And then the ones who take care of them are vintage-type enthusiasts who like quirky things and magnets. So it's kind of two different.
I'm in that category.
two different.
A man and his magnets.
A man and his magnets. Two different approaches to that. So if we can just get the car people, the car lovers who know how to do all this stuff and understand the importance of doing things in the appropriate order to get the thing to run, except this is not a car, it has no wheels, it does not run, with the people over here who live in them and have to keep the rollers on the sliding doors straight, you got it made. And we're working on that,
Mark, as you look at the challenge of going ahead, do you see any shortcuts that you can make in terms of using more current modern materials or parts to fill in?
Well, originally they said to build the thing on a concrete foundation, and
Right.
I'm going to build it on a block crawl space so I can get underneath it.
Oh, great.
People have done that. I can show you a couple around here that got put back together.
So that's one thing. You're going to build it on a crawl space.
Right.
All right.
The one in downtown Raleigh is built up, and it's going to have a crawl space.
That's handy when you got to do the oil change.
Yes, exactly.
That's a joke.
Yeah.
I got it.
I can get plumbing underneath there and wiring and all that stuff. We are probably going to use a heated floor, and we probably will use zone air conditioning systems.
Okay.
So it's going to be very energy efficient, and it's just going to be easier to put together, I think, if you can get underneath it.
So
Oh, yeah.
how do you submit this to a planning or inspections department? I mean, normally for a house, you'd have blueprints you turn in and they'd say you can do this or you can do that. You have a truck full of parts. So how do you submit this to the city?
Well, but I do have drawings.
You do? Okay.
Yes. So that's the main thing is I have drawings, and they're mainly concerned about water and electrical. That's the three trades are going to be what they're going to be concerned about.
Okay.
Building and plumbing and electrical.
And not termites.
And not termites, right?
No, because they don't eat through the metal.
Yeah.
No.
And these houses were also supposed to be virtually fireproof too, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
Nothing in there to burn.
Nothing in it to burn.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that there was a fire in one. So how did that happen?
So the one in Lustron that's on the market had been modified. There's a stick-built structure through a little corridor added onto it. So it's like it was an in-law suite, an early version of an in-law suite, not physically connected to the Lustron except by this little corridor. So at the same time they did that, they put in the utility room area and going into the kitchen a drywall and some grass cloth behind, to make it pretty. And the tenants who were in there at a time swear they only went to the store for just a couple of minutes, but a cigarette burned the grass cloth. And once that caught on fire, then it just went up and destroyed like 4, 5, or 6 of the 4x4 ceiling panels are melted. It did damage to the HVAC and everything. So the rest of the house is intact, but the wall between the utility room and the bathroom basically not melted, but all the panels distorted. So she has to replace those. The insurance company would not declare it a complete disaster, so they gave her some money for it. In order to put the fire out, the firemen had to knock a hole in the roof. I don't think they realized when they started it was a metal roof. So she had her very knowledgeable handyman do a temporary metal roof patch on the thing, which doesn't look too bad cosmetically. He did a pretty nice job. So I assured her when they put it on the market that, we had enough parts to repair that and all this good stuff. And I've probably taken a dozen phone calls from people interested in restoring it because it's on a beautiful corner lot in downtown Lewisburg in the historic district and everything. But some of her desire to preserve this may be greater than the physical actuality permits.
Okay. Let me ask you, as you've been studying all of this, who's actually done this recently? Has anybody put one of these back together from scratch
absolutely.
successfully?
Absolutely.
Where are they?
We got the one that was on Highway 64 West in Pittsboro, moved diagonally across the street, put on a foundation.
Right. But it was already together. I'm talking about ones that are in parts.
They took the inside of this one out. You're right. They moved this one across the street. The answer is yes. There are several people who have reestablished, who have rebuilt these, like the one that I told you about. One of the ones from McCain came down and it was taken apart, and the one that was next to Aberdeen was reassembled on site. There are 2 others that I know of that people have recently, you follow the Facebook pages for enough years and, I bought this kit. What do I do with this? People have put them together. A lot of times what they do is they will put the 2x2 panels on a stick-built frame. So they build the whole house. So it's not a genuine, quote-unquote, Lustron, but it's Lustron parts, Lustron roof, but stick-built frame otherwise. One made it like longer. It's almost a double. And another one had 2 side by side with a pool over here and that motel that was done with the parts. It is possible to do.
Okay.
Not to discourage you there, Mark.
No, the one on Buffalo Road is the one that's in downtown Raleigh.
Yes.
And apparently they took that apart piece by piece.
Except they kept the steel frame, see?
Right.
Because the steel frame moved. And the one in Pittsboro that moved across the street, they took the bottom row of panels off, put I-beams in, lifted it up, diagonally across the street, which was easy because there were no utilities, and you didn't have to have all of the permits and everything. But basically, that was half taken apart and put back together again.
Okay.
If someone, for some crazy reason, is intrigued by this and wants to go and do their own Lustron recombination project, there's a whole community of people that love Lustrons.
Exactly.
What are some of those web pages and sites people can go?
Well, on the NC Modernist Lustron page, we have a lot of links to places. There's also 2 Facebook groups that are prominent. There's Lustron History and Preservation site, which deals more with the technical things of, I want to replace the heater, and has anybody used mini splits? And so you have all these suggestions from people who use mini splits. They'll give you paint codes. If the color codes take to Sherwin-Williams, they make the suggestions on what you can do for the missing rollers. There's actually a guy who's experimenting with printing 3D rollers because the rollers on the pocket doors are always trashed. And we have one guy who is trying to find who the manufacturers were of every single piece of the Lustrons, like who made the gaskets, because gaskets are in short supply, and after 70 years, some of the gaskets. So there's one guy researching the manufacturer of every single part in this thing, and he's just having a field day with, going down these rabbit holes, finding out. It turns out there's a gasket manufacturer in western part of the state here. I forget the city now. But they make gaskets, oddly enough, for automobiles. What a surprise. So that's why I said, we need a car mechanic, a car restoration guy here on staff.
Mark, Virginia, thanks so much for coming in and talking about Lustrons.
My pleasure.
We'll do that. And you can get him back when he gets it built.
We'll do the next show after it's constructed.
You can find more about North Carolina Lustrons at ncmodernist.org/Lustron. That was Virginia Faust and Mark Seibel talking about Lustrons.
Returning guest Monika Ryan is a jazz vocalist known for her rich and emotive voice. A graduate of the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music, she was both a teenager and a professional singer in New York. Monika captivated audiences by interpreting jazz standards with a modern sensibility. She wrote, produced, recorded, and released her first album in 2000 at the age of 25. And now, a little bit more than the age of 25, she's released singles from her 14th full-length album, Playfully, back in June, and the whole album dropped in August. Welcome back to the show, Monika.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Monika, you've been really busy since the last time we talked to you. One of your recent Instagram posts revealed that you've become a master of multitasking.
Yeah, I'm a mother and a teacher of music, of voice, and of composition, and I am a musician, so you have to be able to juggle.
Right.
Do you teach at your house or at someplace else?
I teach both through my house and through a small local music school. Students find me any number of ways. Sometimes they reach out directly to me, and sometimes through a school. I teach also in person and through Zoom, so I have students from all over the place.
Oh, wow. All over the country, the world?
I have not yet taught an international lesson, but I actually have taken one. But I have taught students all over the country.
Do your kids understand how well you sing, or is it just that thing that mom does?
That's very, very sweet. My kids are very, I would say they're both, one's 14 and the other is 16. And they've been studying music since they were 2 and 4 in organized lessons. So they do understand that I'm a skilled musician, and they're very complimentary and supportive of me.
Okay, so they don't roll their eyes all the time.
Oh, no. They ask me to record, and they weigh in on my recordings, and they give me their advices and their thoughts. My daughter, my 14-year-old, is a very talented bassoon player, and my son is an excellent guitarist. And my daughter also plays guitar, but she prefers to focus on the bassoon.
You're lucky.
Yeah, you've got your own studio band right there.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they're wonderful. They're wonderful, wonderful people. I'm delighted to have them in my life and have been since they were born.
Now, way back in the 60s when the movie My Fair Lady came out, Rex Harrison became famous for basically speaking some of the songs. It was kind of a spoken word singing thing. The song he did most frequently was On the Street Where You Live.
Yes, I love that song.
And I noticed on this new album, you kind of merge into speaking as well as singing. How did that come about?
I think, this album, I wrote this album in February, actually, this last year. I write every day. And when I have a specific project in mind, it usually flows very naturally and fluidly. And I basically wrote the way that I speak. This album, all of the songs on this album are pretty much the way I see the world. It's very, very, I would say, philosophically autobiographical. So maybe that is why it came to be the way it did, because I was writing the way I go through the world and speak to people.
And this next song is one you wrote from the new album Playfully, with a trio of veteran collaborators, Steve Einerson on piano, Renee Hart on bass, and Alvester Garnett on drums. Here is Reason to Be Happy.
I love you so, and I want for you true happiness. You mean the world to me, so I'll try to be as clear as I can be. Sometimes the tide is high and all boats do rise. Everything's lush and fine. Sometimes the tide is low and there's nowhere to go but down. At the end of the day, life's a gift in every way, and that alone is reason to be happy. I love you so, and I want for you true happiness. You mean the world to me, so I'll try to be as clear as I can be. Sometimes the tide is high and all boats do rise. Everything's flush and fine. Sometimes the tide is low and there's nowhere to go but down. At the end of the day, life's a gift in every way, and that alone is reason to be happy.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually wrote that for my kids.
Now, do you think you're an optimistic sort of soul?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. You know, everybody's got their intrinsic nature, who they, just how they present and how they see the world. But I tend to think that life is a series of experiences and lessons, and we can learn and grow and become better from everything that happens to us. Some things are more fun than other things, but every breath we take is an opportunity to improve ourselves. So I'm a natural optimist in that way.
It's an opportunity to have fun.
That too, yeah.
I also have to point out that I don't encounter too many 3-minute-long songs with a drum solo.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's an action-packed tune.
Well, thanks. I wrote this with, when you have certain influences and you might make a sketch with that in mind. And my first vocal jazz love was many people's first vocal jazz love was Ella Fitzgerald, the younger Ella Fitzgerald with the Chick Webb Orchestra. Mm-hmm. And she sang these nursery rhyme type songs. Right. And so this is my homage to this sort of nursery rhyme style song done with where they play the whole song up front as an orchestra. And then you have the little song, the solos, and then the little song out. So it was definitely an homage to that.
There's a real spiritual component to your work and your personality. And of course, if you're going to do anything new age, it has to have a lot of vowels. So you had a project called Akasha, that's got 4 vowels. It was selected for a 2022 Global Music Award. Tell us about that.
So Akasha, I was contacted by 2 producers in India who I knew from the Grammy circuit, actually. I'm a voting member of the Recording Academy, and the members of the Recording Academy are a community, a global community, and we meet each other at various in-person and online events. I had met them several years ago, and we said, we should work together in the future. And I had been experimenting with some jazz-influenced new age global music. Shortly after I put something out in that nature, one of them called me and said, we'd like to do a project together. Let's write something and perform and record something together. So I brought in another wonderful producer in New York who's a Broadway producer. And together we created this album about Akasha. Represents the element of the universe, almost like the air that connects us all. So it's about being connected and being one. So with all 4 of us at the helm, we created this album of oneness and meditation, and it was a delight to create.
I bet it sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Tell us about this next song that you wrote from the new album called Slipping Out.
So Slipping Out is a song about being where you need to be and doing what you need to do at wherever you are. And then when it's time for you to leave, leaving quietly and getting out and not getting ensnared in being where you don't need to be anymore. You're going to the next place you need to be. So in my mind, when I wrote this song, I was actually picturing a scene from maybe a 1960s movie in a bar or a lounge, and there are all these people that you don't need to be there anymore. You're getting out, you're maneuvering around waiters and around people who might bring you into a conversation, but you're leaving. And when you get out, you feel so great because you're on to the next thing. That thing is complete, and you can go be free doing the next thing. That's what the song is about.
I recall some weddings and funerals I felt that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's Monika with Slipping Out.
I'm tiptoeing out, be gone without a trace, leaving without a ripple, leaving no empty space. I'll silently slink by with the stealth of a cat, and once I am gone, that'll be that. I'm working it out, moving light on my feet, swiftly winding my way to an exit that's neat. Stop and start on a dime, bend and move with the flow. Invisibly I'll drift by, and out the door I'll go. In the cool open air, I'll be able to breathe, letting down my hair, rolling down my sleeves. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. I'm slipping on out without a shudder or breeze. At the door, I'm stepping out, closing the door, oh so quietly. Oh so quietly. Oh, so quietly.
That is lovely.
Thank you.
Monika, are you going to be touring anywhere this fall where we could come see you sing in person?
Well, I will be headed to Spain, and I'm not set to perform there, but I will be recording there in Valencia with an excellent guitar player friend of mine who is a Brazilian guitar player living in Spain, who I know because he used to live in New York, so he gets around. But he's a wonderful, wonderful guitar player, Sergio Pereira. So I'll be writing and recording an album with him in Spain in the fall.
The website is MonikaRyan.com. That's MonikaRyan.com, where you can get on her mailing list and be notified about upcoming performances. Thank you, Monika.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you. I love your show.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.1 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with Kelly Policelli on guest research. US Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another Insert Tab A into Slot B edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Prefabs, that's what it's all about.